Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep View Conversations. I'm your host, Ian Krietzberg, and today I've got a really fun episode for you. My guest is Jerry Chow. Now, Jerry is an experimental physicist, an IBM fellow, and the director of quantum infrastructure at IBM. And if you hadn't guessed it already, today we are taking a deep dive into quantum. Jerry, thanks so much for joining us today.
Good to be here.
Cool. So there's so much to get into. I'm so excited to chat with you. I was at the quantum computing facility in Yorktown a couple weeks ago, and I'm very interested in diving into quantum more deeply. But for starters, you've been studying quantum for a while. And I guess I'm wondering, for you, why this technology is worth, dedicating your life towards, expanding.
So I mean, like, my personal journey is related to I guess an interest in physics at a pretty young age, right? So like my father is a physicist, and was a retired professor of physics. And I'd always been, interested in challenging topics, right? And but I was always interested in physics from the point of view of something that could be actually applied. And when I went into my studies in university and then subsequently in graduate school, I think quantum physics was certainly had that like difficult element to it, right? But challenging element to it. But then what was really, intriguing to me was that it also had this potential practical element to it in terms of like studying the quantum mechanics within, specific devices, right? And this leads down the path of exploring like, quantum mechanical phenomenon to build qubits. And lo and behold, that technology can actually build towards a completely novel and new computational platform. And so, that's sort of how I got my feet wet into this area, which was really, from a experimental applied physics angle, right? But that's really, taken a life of its own in terms of becoming a technology that, lays this groundwork for a really novel future of computing path.
And so you mentioned qubits, and just, for starters, I know it's broad, and I'm sure you probably get asked this question a lot. But, when we think about quantum, it has a name, right, that seems kind of inaccessible. But what exactly is quantum, and how does it compare to the kind of computation that we've become so familiar with?
Yeah, I mean, I think, quantum sounds scary, right? But in the end, it's just a branch of physics. From the point of view of information, right, it means that there are a different set of physical laws, right, that information is governed by in the quantum computing realm, right, than traditional information. And that's really the core difference, right? That when you have underlying different math, there's different ways of computing and different things that you can do, right? Traditional computers, we talk about bits, zeros and ones, and physical instantiations of that are voltage levels within a transistor and things like that, right? And or physical switches, and computation that all we know with our laptops, our phones, and everything that we know in a lot of our modern technology is based off of computation, based off of the progression of those types of Boolean logic. But with quantum computing, right, we have quantum bits. And quantum bits become now the information carriers. They follow these different laws of quantum mechanics, which gives them special abilities, and in essence allows us to compute quite differently, and in certain cases compute certain problems in a way that you can get sort of an exponential increase in capability than you would with classical Boolean-based logic.
So you mentioned bits and qubits, right? And bits
Yeah.
are the zeros and ones. From my minimal understanding, qubits are able to be zeros or ones. They can kind of interchange or something? Like what exactly is going on? I know
Yeah,
it's a
so I
big
mean,
thing, but
in the quantum information realm, right now you have as your logical unit of information, it is the quantum bit or qubit. And you can think of it as they can be in different states, and they can be in a zero state, or they can be in a one state, but they can also be in superposition states, right? Where there's a they can be in, some kind of people say a little bit of zero, a little bit of one at the same time. But the fundamental thing there about the laws of quantum mechanics is that when you actually need to ask that bit, that qubit, what its state is it in, you have to actually perform a measurement. And so you force it into either one or zero. And so that means that there's always still a deterministic result at the end. That's a one or zero. But at some given time during a computation, it could be in some kind of superposition of zero and one at the same time.
and that makes like that's the critical element that makes it more
One of
robust
them,
or different.
right? One of them, right? One of them in the sense that it allows you to, during the operation of a computation, and oftentimes we call the unit of not information, but the unit of computation, like sort of a quantum circuit. Right? A quantum circuit is a collection of operations on various qubits. That when you perform operations on these qubits, these information carrying elements, that they can be in things like superpositions. They can also be in things like entangled states, right? Where there's actually this capability where you can't actually extricate information into individual pieces, that they can only be seen in a collective way with other qubits, right? But the cool thing is like all that happens within the context of inside of a computation, inside of a circuit. And at the end of it, you always still measure, and you always still get back zeros and ones. So you always still get a deterministic result at the end. And that's what actually allows us to, then further compute using those results, combine it with classical logic and so forth.
Interesting. So, and I believe IBM put its first quantum computer up in 2016. So we're looking at almost 10 years now. And I'm wondering, we've seen a lot of advances in sort of technological capabilities, looking at artificial intelligence for one, right, in the past couple of years. I'm wondering over that timeline from 2016 to now, what has changed in quantum? Are we getting closer to a place of, usability?
No, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot that's been happening, right? In the sense of, certainly from our perspective at IBM, that initial project to place something on the cloud really showed that we could turn this from something which is like a physics experiment, right, into something that can be a computational tool, right? Programmable, something that can have an underlying instruction set. And from that, the early days really trying to build up the community, build up interest in learning about this new form of computing. But since then, we've really matured in terms of like how we see it being a part of the full computational ecosystem, right? So that quantum computers don't exist in a vacuum; they exist within the context of other more traditional computing resources, right? But they happen to be very good at solving specific types of problems. And, we can think of like solving any type of problem as like, how do you represent that problem, or how do you break down that problem in terms of some kind of effective data representation? And if it happens that you can represent that data the problem very well, and the data very well in like, Boolean based logic, then you're going to use traditional computers, right? If you happen to actually represent it very well in the language of matrices or linear algebra and tensors, you might use GPUs, right? But now there's a different set of problems that you might actually want to map onto this language of quantum circuits, right? Where we are leveraging these, different features of superposition and entanglement and, quantum measurement, different set of language, different data representation, and a different set of tools for solving problems. So it's not meant to sort of replace all your computational platforms, right? But it coexists with these other ones in a way that you can actually tackle much more challenging problems, but that make use of these various different types of representations, right? So the evolution of how we think about how it fits within this overall computational architecture is one thing, but also in the same period of 9 years, 8 years, we've progressively improved the capability of the underlying hardware and software, right? From scaling up the number of qubits, right? But also improving the quality of the execution of these quantum circuits to get reliable results.
I'm glad you mentioned that because something that I've been kind of wondering about in the AI world, there's a lot of benchmarks. We think a lot about benchmark testing. There's all these different ones. I think they put out a new one recently. When it comes to quantum, you just kind of mentioned scaling up qubits and increasing kind of reliability. I wonder, how do you measure the efficacy and utility of these things? Is it a similarly benchmark focused thing? Like, how do you assess that?
No, certainly. I think it's an area of it's certainly an area that we've been focusing on to show that there's improvements in the underlying quality, right? And it's just not just the number of qubits for that matter, right? One key thing that we like to point to is is in essence sort of you can think about it like the complexity of what you can run on a quantum computer is governed by the number of qubits you have, and then the number of operations or the number of gates that you can effectively run and still get useful information, or you get meaningful information out that's not corrupted by, say, the inherent noise in the physical architecture of the system that you have. And so a good rubric really is, you have the size of this circuit that you can run. And so there's both the number of qubits you have and also the depth or the number of gate operations that you can run and still get accurate results. This past year with our Heron processor, we actually showed the ability to push this all the way out to 5,000 gates, right? So 5,000 gates of sort of meaningful execution of circuits, right, across 100 plus qubits. And this is a number we want to continue to scale out, right? That year after year, as we further improve the capabilities of the underlying hardware and quality of the hardware that we had, that we can continue to scale out the number of gates. And ultimately, right, this is also where things like quantum error correction come in, right, to really increase the size of the circuits that we can run that leverage error correction as well. Today, we're using techniques known as error mitigation, right, which gets us to this point of 5,000, eventually several thousand, 10,000, 15,000 gates. But, to push into this realm of several millions of gates, right, or even hundreds of millions of gates, we're going to use quantum error correction.
And as we're in this environment where you're scaling up, you're working on increasing the quality of the hardware and the quantity of the qubits and getting more capable systems. You had mentioned earlier about the idea of IBM's hybrid cloud, where quantum kind of exists in and among all these other types of computing, and we kind of identify, this is a problem for quantum, this is a problem for AI, this is a problem for, classical supercomputers, whatever it is. Is there a particular, and I guess it might be hard to choose, but is there a particular problem for quantum that you think about as capability increases in the next few years that you think will be game changing?
We're already seeing it, right? We're already seeing it in terms of like this past year. Last year we had we call this architecture where it all comes together, right? With classical and quantum, this quantum-centric supercomputing vision, right? But this past year we already had working with our collaborators out in Japan at the Riken Institute, right? And we were able to look at molecular simulation experiments on complex molecules that are beyond exact simulation, right? Beyond what you would calculate exactly on any kind of classical machine, right? Which you would typically use, the the most high performant HPC type systems to look at, leveraging approximate solutions. And we were started looking at problems there, leveraging high performance computing plus quantum computing, right? So we were actually able to look at these iron sulfide clusters, right? These molecular structures that are of interest and of a particular complexity. That for one part of the problem, where we actually were able to map the problem onto a quantum circuit, right, and run it on our hardware, leverage 77 qubits of our Heron processor, right? But then the follow on to that is that we need to take that data and we need to pass it through a sampling algorithm that runs on the Fugaku supercomputer that sits in the Riken Institute, using 6,400 nodes of their custom ASIC high performance cluster. And that sort of back and forth happened many, many times until we get towards an energy diagram in this case for that problem. That's comparable, right, in terms of the solution quality to what you can do using high performance computing alone. So this is really this realm that we're in, right? We call this the utility era, where quantum and classical are going to be working together to push and compete against sort of the best approximate methods that you might have using classical.
This kind of combination that you're talking about of switching between quantum systems and normal systems, it kind of answers a question that I had that's been on my mind a lot, because we talk about the promise of these technologies, right? In a lot of cases, these advanced algorithms are helping out corporations doing specific things in that world. But increasingly, we're hearing about the promise of what they're capable of. We hear about precision healthcare. We hear about finding new molecules. And you see systems and algorithms that kind of bleed into the AI world, like AlphaFold, that are focused on that side of things. And it seems to me that in some of these cases, the promises of quantum and the promises of AI, which seem to be kind of rising at the same time, kind of overlap when you're talking about healthcare and the molecular side of things. And I guess it's just interesting the way that, you might predict them continuing to work together. Is there a world where AI algorithms get processed on quantum hardware?
I think, quantum plus AI is certainly two very hot topics, and the combination of which are also very, very on the top of mind for many people, right? And there are, there's almost two fronts to this, right? There's one side is like using AI to help us with quantum. That's almost something that is already happening in terms of code assistance and things like that. We've worked on a Qiskit code assistant that leverages Watson X, for example, as an example. And then there's also leveraging AI models to help map quantum circuits more effectively onto hardware, right? That can be more efficiently run, especially at a particular size and scale. And then there's the flip side of it, right? Which is how can quantum really influence where we are with AI? That I will say is really a ripe area that's a constant source of a lot of theoretical exploration, right? And there are some threads there of looking at using quantum to help with classification tasks, right? Especially depending on the types of data that's underlying, like dependent on there can be some very, very structured data sets that are very challenging to classify with any kind of classical support vector machine, right? But if you leverage a quantum machine learning type of algorithm, could actually be very fast, right? But I would say that there's a lot there to still be explored. And the best thing we can do is to your point, place them in this kind of compute architecture that allows one to leverage them, right, side by side, right? Because I think that's the key thing, right? Which is that we see this whole vision of quantum centric supercomputing and this future of computing as allowing you to have these multiple modes of computation, right, that can feed one another. And just like we're starting to do this with the HPC community, right, to find the right types of problems that map onto quantum circuits, we're going to have to explore what are the right types of problems that map some part of it into tensors and GPUs, and then another part that maps into quantum circuits and bring it all together.
Since you just mentioned GPUs, an interesting part of AI related to those GPUs and the hardware that kind of powers it is just the kind of sheer cost. Not,
Hmm.
I mean, it relates to dollars, but I'm really talking about the cost of energy.
Yeah.
And I just wonder how quantum hardware fits into the kind of energy efficiency side of things. Is it highly energy intensive to power quantum computers?
It's actually not, right. I think that's the one thing, especially with our types of systems that we're building, which are superconducting qubit based. They do need to be cooled down with dilution refrigeration technology. I think on your tour you probably saw what some of these dilution refrigerators look like.
Yeah.
But in terms of a lot of the energy footprint for those types of systems is the cooling side is actually not that much. Today, there's probably a fair bit that goes into some of the classical infrastructure that supports it, right? But over time, we're also looking to bring a lot of that classical infrastructure inside the cooling system itself too, which then, obviously brings down the total energy dissipation of that as well. So in many ways, for the types of computational tasks that we're looking to do on a quantum computer, it's actually very energy favorable, right, to use quantum computing.
The cost side of these things is always multi-layered, right? And that's one side. The other side, when you look at the kind of chip construction of classical computers, the putting the hardware together itself is energy intensive, or has implications of sustainability because it requires certain minerals that the
Hmm.
mining process isn't maybe a wonderful thing for the environment. I'm Because we're dealing with different hardware here, how much does that carry over when we talk about quantum and the kind of environmental cost, I guess, of building a quantum computer?
Very different materials, certainly, right? I mean, we're talking about superconducting materials that are, relatively, they're not certainly rare. Um, Probably especially for from these systems that require cooling, the one more rare material is something like helium-3, which is an isotope of helium, right? Not the kind that you put in your balloons for birthday parties, but ones that it's a different isotope of helium, and it's required to cool down to the low temperatures that we have, right? That's only one piece of that broader supply chain that we're certainly mindful of. But there are also very, very sort of efficient ways of leveraging that, especially as you scale out to larger system. Data center type of cooling infrastructure is not something that is like a uh, use it and lose it type of thing, right? There are ways of building these systems which have closed cycles, and we're not just exhausting the world's supply of this type of resource. But overall, from the other end of rare materials, it's not necessarily it's not certainly matching the needs for, say, building EV batteries, right?
I want to talk as well. I guess that's somewhat of a bridge to it about the kind of ethics of these more powerful systems, and I guess your ethical consideration as we're working to build them and moving to that era of utility and maybe ubiquitous quantum computing. There are some physicists who don't think quantum should be developed, and I'm curious, if I was, and I am not a physicist by any means, but if I was a physicist saying, Jerry, I don't think this is a good idea. I because of how it might be leveraged by bad actors, maybe it's too powerful. I wonder what you would say to me as someone who's, building
Yeah.
them.
I mean, to me, it's part of just technology development and improving the tools that we have. And from a computational standpoint, right? Uh, it's not necessarily anything that we should be treating very differently from how we're looking at being responsible about how we are, leveraging high performance computing today, and also, AI today, right? If anything, we can be a little bit early here. We've already set up some responsible quantum computing initiatives at IBM, right? To make sure that this is done in the right way, right? Of course, in a way that does allows us to progress and while not stifling, innovation. Um, but to me, really, like there's just so much to lean on in terms of the evolution of computation in general, that it's not necessarily anything to be treated on its own very differently, right? That is part of this, as we've mentioned already before, that is part of this broader computational framework, right? So you're not going to do any particular carve out just for this particular technology. I think it's overall framework for how do we treat equitable access or fair access to computation in general.
The other side of that I think is starting to have people a little bit concerned is the idea that quantum can break encryptions, the kind of encryptions that today tie the world together.
Right?
And I guess how real is that threat on the
Yeah.
timeline of what should people be doing things now today, getting things in place to prepare and safeguard against that?
Yes, absolutely. Time is now, right? I think the point is that there are safeguards, and knowing that fact, right, that there are quantum safe encryption protocols, right, and then knowing also roadmaps for certainly ourselves as well as other entities out there that are projecting the scale out of this technology. Basically says that enterprises organizations should be looking at quantum safe encryption standards today. And at IBM we have a quantum safe software business that helps people figure this out. But to me, it's one of these things which obviously it's an inertia thing, right? That you don't want to be the first one to do it. You almost need the industries to move together, right? And uh, a lot of that is the communication, and we see already the rollout of NIST standards, right? And so you're starting to hear it at the highest levels, right? In terms of information security, even from our government, right? Those are the protocols to be used and leveraged, and we need whole sectors to move, and not just individual pieces.
And that's a movement that ought to be happening very soon, I guess, because the eventuality of the encryption breaking is on a very near term horizon.
Right. I mean, like, over the next decade, these types of scale out of these systems will be at scales that we can start looking at problems like Shor's algorithm, right? Whether it does it at full scale or not is something obviously we will see when we build them. But the point is not even to get there. Change your data security already, right? So that we don't even have to worry about that.
We're talking about this idea of, quantum is kind of on the verge. It's been building for a while, it's been gaining traction. And like you said, in the next decade, we're going to see more of these. It's going to be more of a norm. As these things become more of a norm, as they become more available and accessible and capable and usable, I'm wondering how you think. I know we talked earlier about benchmarks and measurements and identifying problems designed or best suited for quantum to solve. I wonder how you think about the limitations of that kind of near-term futuristic scenario. If we can identify what problems quantum is good at, what is it not good at? What might it never be good at?
I think it's never good at replacing a lot of the things that we do with our computers today, right? It's not built to do the tasks of that we're doing today, like calling on this video or sending emails, right? And that a big part of that is to emphasize also from the multi computational platform standpoint that you need all these pieces working together, right? You're never gonna give up your traditional semiconductor based computers, and you're probably never gonna give up the GPU frameworks, right? For tensor based types of problems. And this becomes another tool that is specifically best designed for problems that are best written in the language of quantum circuits. And that's the best way to see it, right? That all comes together. Um, for me, I think a fun thing to say is that, like, we would love, as these things become more obviously more mature, and we continue to scale out, that over time the abstraction should drive us so that users don't even know that things are running on a quantum computer, right? I mean, today when you're running something on your when you ask Siri something, or you ask, any of these AI agents, how much of it is being run natively on your phone, and how much of it is being run on some GPU cluster in the cloud? You don't know, but it all gets stitched together in the result that you get. And we want to see that too, right? For obviously a much broader and more diverse set of problems that we now will be able to solve, but now parts of it would have been done on a quantum computer and you might not even know it.
Well, that would be something. And yeah, like you said, right? We have no idea what's going here, what's going to a GPU cluster in the cloud. Everything just kind of gets bundled in and stitched together. Um, that'll be worth watching. And I guess kind of related to this idea of limitations and targeted usability. You know, quantum isn't some sledgehammer that we're going to hit every single problem with, like you said. It's targeted use cases. There's a lot of hype around about I don't know. It's about all technology, really. Yeah, you
Hmm.
see the hype if you go on Twitter and just scroll on the algorithms for a little while. There's a lot of hype. Some of it's super positive, some of it's excessively negative.
Yeah.
I wonder how the hype helps or hurts efforts to build quantum. Is it a good thing because it raises awareness? Does it hurt because it, might misinform people's impressions of capabilities? How do you think about it?
It's certainly a mixed bag, right? That obviously you like people talking about the technology, right? Um, and there's always the concern of overhype and sort of prognosticating failure by trying to overpromise. But a big part of this for us is just stick to our roadmap, show the capabilities, and bring in the adoption with users at a fundamental scientific level, and then certainly at an enterprise level, right? Just as we scale out to leverage the tools. And so, for us, we take a very practical stance on this, which is that, there can be all that hype, but in the end, it comes down to like, what are we really actually bringing to the table as a computational platform? That's why demonstrations like what I talked about earlier with the Recon problem become so tangible, because now it speaks to this other community of users that literally in the past all they did was look at what can I run on a high performance cluster. Now they actually need to ask the question, well, what if I actually had quantum as part of that, right? And so now they're looking and they're going to be paying attention to our roadmap and saying, okay, well, now they're improving the quality like this, and then in 2 years they're going to get to this, and these are real points that we want people to use, right? And so like my best, my people love to say whether it's 20, 30 years away, some people want to say that, right? But our roadmap says where we're going to be, and we expect to have the adoption level and the value that we can bring towards challenging computational problems, right? In a defined time. And the proof is in the pudding in terms of what we can build and what we can really deliver.
Now, since you mentioned that, right, you have a specific defined timeline. You expect to derive the value from, I guess, this investment. I wonder what you can tell me about the scale of the investment. For you to achieve the kind of adoption and use of these computers that would make it make the investment in quantum that you've undertaken pay off. What scale of adoption are we talking about?
We've certainly 2016, right, when we first placed the system on the cloud, and we were just excited at that time that we were getting, on the first couple of weeks, several, hundreds of thousands of users. Over the many years, we've gotten to, close to over 500,000, users of our platform. Uh, our open source Qiskit platform is the most popular one and preferred by many quantum developers. And then, at a scale of the quantum network, which is our, you can think of it as our business ecosystem, we have over 280 members. And so we've driven that adoption to this degree currently, but I think there's still way more to go, right? And, what is the right level? We are, we're obviously doing, um, you continue to scale in terms of our footprint, in terms of like the number of systems we have out there, and especially at this 100 plus qubit level, um, they're constantly being used too, right? Like, so that's the thing. Like, they're always up, and then they're also always constantly being up. But we're going to be very demand driven, and we're prepared to continue to drive it. And so, I guess to put it there, it's like the answer to your question sort of is like we're very, we're not just putting they're out there things out there and hoping that people are using it, right? We're putting it out there with the very strategic intent of growing adoption and opening the funnel to, for example, this new HPC market and these HPC users to say, get in there. We think that this is going to be a useful tool for you. And then we will obviously increase the number of systems that we can put out there to capture that user base, right? So we're very driven by exactly the user base and the demand that we have, right? But to me, I think that's this key next piece, which is this quantum centric supercomputing vision, where it's an untapped um, opportunity with all the high performance computing users that, and for HPC in the start is very much for scientific compute to begin, and this is exactly what this is going to be useful for in this near term phase, scientific compute to discover new algorithms that really inform those next level enterprise types of applications, right? So broadly speaking, I think we have this opportunity to keep driving adoption in the near term at that level, right? Engage the high performance computing community, um, um, and really open the door towards longer term enterprise value.
It's a really cool moment to be kind of observing, I guess. And so you guys aren't the only ones investing in quantum. There's a few other people, mainly the big tech folks with the kind of capital to invest in it. And, since I got you here, I have to ask you about this one thing. So Google recently unveiled a quantum breakthrough, they called it, with their Willow chip that, according to them, completed a computation in 5 minutes that would have taken a classical computer 10 septillion years. Now, that's not the part I wanted to ask you about. In that, Google said that breakthrough, and I'm quoting here, lends credence to the notion that quantum computation occurs in many parallel universes. And I just, we're talking about multiverses. I know nothing about this.
You don't need to know anything about it.
I'd love to hear what is going on with that. Is there any consideration in all the, I guess, work that you're doing on building quantum about messing around with parallel universes and the multiverse theory? Is that relevant?
They're not relevant. That's just buzzwords in order to describe it, like the concept of quantum entanglement, right? Quantum entanglement is this feature that in some interpretations are things happening in parallel universes. But the whole point is that in the end you measure and you still get tangible results out of your system. Uh, and I again, we've talked a lot today from the point of view of what we feel is tangible, practical, usable computation, right? And I'm not of at least of the mind that we need to hype to that level, right? Of obviously something like multiverse is very buzzworthy from the point of view of, especially if you're like a Marvel fan or something like that, but not relevant when it comes to the discussion of how do I use this as a tool? How do I use this to advance what I can compute? How can I start to leverage it for, my scientific interests, for my enterprise interests, to really make an impact on my business, especially as this technology continues to advance and continues to, scale in terms of the number of qubits and as well as the quality of the execution. Right?
Yeah, it's that hype that we were talking about earlier, right? It's so easy for this stuff to get entangled with science fiction, and for the layperson, it gets hard, and I think it's getting increasingly more difficult to differentiate what bits are science and what bit is sci-fi.
So, it's why, having these types of conversations to help set the record straight, I think are great.
Exactly, and yeah, so I guess just just to wrap up, right? We're setting the record straight. In setting that record straight for people who maybe have heard the word quantum but don't want to get involved in it, it's too confusing. Is there a single big takeaway for the layperson to understand about quantum, understand about what's coming, that you think is just should be top of mind for everybody,
Yeah.
regardless of physicist or quantum mechanic or not?
Yeah. No, I think, it is certainly good for the layperson to understand that quantum is going to be a revolutionary computational tool, right? That it will greatly expand the types of things that we can look at, that we can solve, that we can, reasonably rely on computers for. But we need to think about it within that lens, that it augments our capability of computation. And it's not meant to be anything that replaces what we have with our computers today. It's not meant to necessarily be a replacement for AI or anything like that. It'll all come together in terms of just increased computational capability, and in areas that are really of certainly societal benefit, right? Like materials, like drugs, like understanding our natural world better, right? All these types of things, huge potential, but also I think something which is like something that's already here to try, right? So there's this phase of like the promise that we want to get to, but there's also this phase of we probably can already start to find like useful things today, and it's already capable of being paired with the most advanced computers today. And that's where, if you want to take that step in and not just be a layperson, but dive in, there's tons of resources to already get started.
Hmm.
Open source software programming, free access to some of our most advanced systems, right? And there's a lot to learn.
It is certainly an exciting time, Jerry. I really appreciate pulling you away from the quantum front here to talk to me about what's going on there. I feel like I learned so much. So thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. I had a great time here.